She had been recognized in 14 countries, followed, photographed, studied. And on a Thursday afternoon in October, she walked into a room where a man looked up from his desk, looked directly at her, and felt nothing. Not indifference, not recognition suppressed out of politeness. Nothing. He simply did not know who she was. And in the 11 seconds it took her to understand that something happened that no premiere, no nomination, no standing ovation in any room she had ever stood in had managed to produce. She felt for the first time in longer than she could measure, like a person rather than a phenomenon. She sat down. She did not leave for 17 minutes. She would spend the next 8 weeks trying to understand why. Her name was Lena Voss, 34 years old, born in a city she no longer lived in, to parents she still called every Sunday, with the punctuality of someone who understands that some rituals are the architecture of a self, and that without them, you lose the floor plan. In the industry that had built her, she was described with the words that industries use when they want to convey exceptional value without surrendering the power of the description. Bankable, luminous. Once in a profile she had not consented to but could not prevent, the word transcendent was used. She had read that word at midnight in a hotel room and laughed until it hurt, then sat in the silence and understood that the laugh and what came after it were the most honest things she had done all week. She was not ungrateful. Gratitude was not the problem. The problem was something she did not yet have language for, the particular condition of a woman who had spent 11 years being everything to everyone in every room she entered and had arrived, without announcement, at the question of whether there was anything left over, whether when the room emptied, there was a version of her that existed outside the performance of existing. She had stopped asking in the 6th year because there was never enough quiet to hear the answer. She had been in the city 9 days when it happened. A film, 8 weeks on location. She was very good at her job. This was not the story. The story begins on a Thursday afternoon when her driver was 20 minutes early and her publicist was in a meeting, and the gap between one obligation and the next was, for 40 minutes, entirely unaccounted for. She stepped out of a side door. Not dramatically. She was making a decision, not a statement, and the decision was simply this. For 40 minutes, she would be a woman walking in a city rather than a figure moving through a managed itinerary. She walked. For 18 minutes, she was simply a woman on a street. I want to give you the detail that matters here, the specific human thing. 6 years earlier, she had done her own grocery shopping, every Tuesday morning, early, before the city fully committed to itself. She had a preferred cereal, a blue box, chosen herself, over time, through the accumulated evidence of ordinary mornings. She had not been to a supermarket in 6 years, not because she was above it, because the last time she tried, a man in the bread aisle filmed her for 45 seconds and posted it before she reached the checkout, and the comments discussed the contents of her basket with the focused intimacy of people who had mistaken access for entitlement. She had not gone back. She was thinking about this not with bitterness, but with the quiet, bewildered inventory of a woman counting what she had quietly given away. When she turned onto a street she had no reason to turn onto, and stopped. There was a window. In the window, a model, a building rendered in pale wood and measured silence, a structure that did not yet exist anywhere except in the patient attention of the man who had built it. Small, exact, the kind of thing you only see when you have, for once, stopped. She stood looking at it. Inside, a man was working. His name was Daniel Ashworth, 37 years old. He had moved to this city 9 years earlier, not for opportunity, which had been available in larger places, but for the quality of light it produced on winter mornings. Pale, unhurried, a light that fell across drawing boards and did not ask anything of the person receiving it. He finished things. This was the essential fact of him. Not a virtue he had decided to perform, a condition. He had once spent 11 months on a residential commission because the client kept changing what they wanted, and he had stayed with it not from stubbornness, but from the conviction that a thing had been started and therefore would be completed. He did not watch films. He had simply never found them as interesting as the problems on his desk. He was thinking about a load-bearing calculation on a Thursday afternoon when the bell above his door moved. He looked up. There was a woman in the doorway. He did not recognize her. This is the detail that will require a moment. In a city where her face had appeared on 3 billboards within a square mile of where they were standing, in a culture that had reproduced her image so thoroughly that recognition had become reflexive, this man looked at her and saw a woman he had not met. Not because he was incurious, because he did not watch films. He said, "Can I help you?" And something in her, something that had been clenched for longer than she had registered, quietly released. She said she had been looking at the model in the window. He said, "The Whitmore Commission, a community library. The client wants a building that feels like an invitation rather than an institution." She said, "How do you make a building feel like an invitation?" He considered this with the unhurried quality of a man for whom thinking is not performance, but process. He said, "You begin with the door, what it faces, what it says to the person walking toward it before they've made any decision yet. A door that faces the street at a slight angle says come in differently than a door that faces it head on. Most people don't notice. They feel it." She said, "Do you always explain things like that?" He said, "Like what?" She said, "Like the thing itself is worth understanding." He said he hadn't considered that there was another way. She sat down. Not because he invited her, because the chair was there, and she had been standing inside a performance for 9 consecutive days, and the man across the desk had not, in the 3 minutes since she walked through his door, needed a single thing from her. They talked for 17 minutes, about the library, about a bridge she had crossed that morning that had something in its structure she couldn't name, but couldn't stop thinking about. He named it for her. Catenary suspension, the natural curve a chain makes when it hangs between 2 fixed points. He said most bridges fight their own weight. That one worked with it. She said, "Is that better, working with the weight rather than against it?" He said, "In structures, always. In other things, I imagine it depends." Her phone erupted. 6 notifications in 4 seconds. Her real life arriving to collect her. She stood. The 17 minutes closed like a door. She said her name. Just her first name. Lena. Offered the way you offer something small and true to someone who hasn't asked for the large version. She left. She was 2 streets away before she understood what had happened in that room. Nothing had happened in that room. That was precisely what had happened. Now. I told you he did not recognize her. What I did not tell you was what he did the following morning. He looked her up. He found in 40 seconds the 3 nominations and the covers and the profile in which the word transcendent had been used, and the photographs, hundreds of them, from events and premieres, and the staged, candid moments that her industry produced with the efficiency of a system that had learned to monetize the appearance of spontaneity. He looked at these for approximately 4 minutes. Then he closed the window and returned to the Whitmore Commission. He made a decision he did not announce, that he would not have been able to fully explain if asked, that none of what he had just seen changed anything about the 17 minutes that had preceded it. This is the man she was about to walk back into. 3 days later, she came back. She had a reason prepared. A building she had passed on her way to set, a Victorian warehouse conversion she had genuine questions about. It was not the reason. She knew this. She filed the knowledge in the place where she kept things that were true but inconvenient. And she walked through the unremarkable door, and he looked up and said, "The warehouse on Mercer Street, Georgian brick, reinforced in the 30s. You can see the joint if you know where to look." She stopped. She said, "I didn't mention a warehouse." He said, "You crossed Mercer Street this morning at approximately 8:15. It's the only building on that route that would produce that expression on someone who notices structures." She said, "You noticed that I noticed structures." He said, "In 17 minutes, yes." She sat down. He made coffee. With the same quality of attention he brought to everything, unhurried, precise, the coffee of a man who has decided that if a thing is worth doing, it is worth doing completely. She watched him and felt something she could not immediately name, the specific comfort of being in a room with a person who was not, in any register she could detect, performing. She came back again on Saturday, and the following Wednesday, and the Thursday after that. each visit carved out of a schedule maintained by three people who would have described her 40-minute disappearances as a security concern rather than a human necessity. She did not tell them where she went. This is the detail I want you to hold. A woman whose every movement was logged, whose location was known to her team at all times. This woman had a secret. The secret was a small office on an unremarkable street where a man made good coffee and talked about buildings as though they were worth understanding. On the fourth visit, he put down his pencil. He said, "What are you looking for when you come here?" The room held the question. She did not deflect it. She had spent 11 years being excellent at deflection, the redirect, the self-deprecating pivot. The answer that answered a different question so smoothly that no one noticed the substitution. She did not use it. She said, "Somewhere that doesn't know what to do with me." He was quiet. Then, "I don't know what to do with you." She said, "I know. That's why I keep coming back." He looked at her with the full level attention of a man for whom looking is not a social gesture, but an act. He said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a long time." She said, "It's the most honest thing I've said in longer than that." Neither of them moved. There is a specific quality to the silence that falls between two people who have just told each other the truth in the same breath. It is not comfortable. It does not ask to be. It is simply what happens when the performance stops and the room has to hold what's left. What was left was two people without their armor. It was, for both of them, terrifying. It was, for both of them, a relief. What followed was not a love story either of them would have named. It was an accumulation. Evenings carved out of schedules not designed to accommodate them. Walks through parts of the city he knew by instinct, and she had never been permitted to simply wander, because wandering requires the freedom to be unaccounted for. And she had surrendered that freedom so gradually she had not noticed the moment it left. Her life did not have the texture of a place. It had the texture of a schedule. And she was beginning, in the growing dark of evenings on the street she was not supposed to be on, to understand that this was not a professional condition, it was a personal one. He told her about Claire, his erstwhile girlfriend. Not dramatically, the way a man tells a true story when he has stopped needing the other person to respond in any particular way. He said she had been right, that he did not know still how to correct the thing she had correctly identified in him. She said, "You're doing it right now." He said, "Doing what?" She said, "Making me feel like the only detail." He was quiet for a long moment. He said, "Is that better?" She said, "Daniel, I am in a city I do not live in. I have rearranged my schedule 4 times this week for a walk." "Yes, it is better." On a Tuesday at 6 in the morning, he took her to a supermarket. This was not his idea of a romantic gesture. It was a practical response to something she had told him, delivered with the careful lack of drama of a man who hears what people say and does the next logical thing without commentary. The supermarket was empty at 6. The fluorescent ceiling, the quiet hum of refrigeration units, the smell of a place not yet inhabited by the day. She walked into the cereal aisle and stood there for 4 minutes. He did not speak. He did not watch her with the expression of a man waiting to feel good about himself. He stood at the end of the aisle with a basket, looking at something on the opposite shelf, giving her the room to be alone inside a decision. She chose the blue box. She stood holding it and felt something move through her chest that she could not have named. It was not happiness exactly. It was the return of something she had not known was missing until the precise moment it came back. 2 tears, the quiet kind, the kind that arrived not from grief, but from the shock of recognition, its own species of loss and relief simultaneously. He appeared at her elbow. He took the blue box and placed it in the basket without looking at her. Not because he was indifferent, because he understood with the precision of a man who knows what a structure needs and what it does not, that this was not a moment that required witness. She said, "Thank you." He said, "I need eggs. Do you know where they keep eggs in these places?" She laughed. The real laugh, the one with no calculation in it. This is what it looks like when something real begins. Not the first conversation. Not the moment one person recognizes another across a crowded room. Not the curated, cinematic version we have been handed so many times we have begun to mistake it for truth. It looks like a Tuesday morning, an empty aisle, a blue box of cereal, a man who knows when not to look, but nothing real grows without something threatening it. And the threat, when it came, arrived from the most predictable direction available. Her world had been watching. It began with a photograph. Not a dramatic one. That is the thing about these intrusions. They do not announce their weight in advance. The photograph was taken on a Wednesday evening, on a street she had no professional reason to be on, by a person she never saw, on a device no larger than a deck of cards. She was walking. He was beside her. They were simply two people on a street. The photograph was published at 11:43 p.m. By midnight, his name had been located. By 12:30, the address of his practice. By 1 a.m., the small architectural journal that had described him as a practitioner of considered restraint was receiving more traffic than it had seen in 4 years combined. He arrived the following morning to find two people on the pavement with cameras and the specific, focused patience of a profession that had learned to treat waiting as a skill. He stood on the opposite side of the street. He looked at his office, the unremarkable door, the window with the Whitmore model still in it, from the outside. Then he crossed the street and went to work. She came at midday, through the front door, because there was no longer any point in a side entrance. He had made coffee. She sat down. She said, "I can make this go away. I have a team whose specific function is the management of exactly this. One call, and in 48 hours, this street looks the way it looked 3 weeks ago." He said, "Is that what you want to do?" She held the question the way she held every question he asked her, as though it deserved the full weight of her attention, rather than the nearest available response. She said, "No." He said, "Then don't." She said, "Daniel, they are going to construct a version of this from the outside, with the materials available to them from the outside. And that version will not resemble anything that has actually happened in this room, and you will have to live alongside it. In this city, on this street, at that desk." He said, "I know." She said, "You don't." He said, "Lena, I am a man who has chosen, repeatedly, the version of his life that required the most patience and produced the least spectacle. I understand what it costs to commit to a thing that does not look impressive from the outside." She looked at him. She said, "I leave in 11 days. He said, "I know." She said, "I don't know what this looks like after 11 days. He said, "Neither do I." She said, "Does that bother you?" He said, "Yes, in the way that honest uncertainty bothers a person who prefers to understand the structure of things before committing to them." He paused. "But I have built things in conditions I didn't fully understand. The structure reveals itself in the building." She left at 2 p.m., back into the managed current of her real life, which had not stopped moving and would not stop regardless of what had happened in this room. The cameras were still outside when she left. She walked past them without adjusting her pace. 6 days passed. He did not call, from the particular restraint of a man who remembered what Claire had told him about making people feel like details. He would not reach for something that had not been offered. He would not make her feel that his need was her obligation. He worked. He went to lunch on Tuesday. The owner brought his order without being asked. He was, to all observable measures, entirely fine. He was not entirely fine. On the 6th evening, he sat at his desk after everyone had gone and looked at the chair she always sat in and understood, with the full clarity of a man who has spent his career knowing precisely what he is looking at, that the arrangement of his life had changed in a way that could not be undone by returning to its previous configuration. You cannot unknow a catenary suspension. You cannot unfeel what it is to work with a weight rather than against it. On the 7th day, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He answered. She was at the airport, not leaving. Returned. She had been in Los Angeles for 31 hours, long enough to sit in 3 meetings, sleep for 4 hours in an apartment she hadn't been inside in 7 months, and understand, at approximately 3 a.m. local time, that she had made a mistake. Not a complex one. The simple, unambiguous kind a person makes when they choose the familiar over the true because the familiar requires less. She booked a flight back before she was fully awake. She stood in the doorway of his office at 4:17 in the afternoon. He looked up. She said, I rescheduled 11 things to be here. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you because I want you to know it was not an accident. He put his pencil down. He said, 11 things. She said, my agent is not currently speaking to me. He said, I'm sorry. She said, I'm not. He looked at her with a steady attention she had come to understand was not assessment, but presence. The look of a man who was simply, completely in the room with you. He said, I answered when you called. She said, you always do. He said, yes. She said, that is an extraordinary thing to be able to say to someone. She crossed the room. Not quickly, not with the choreographed momentum of a declaration, simply without performance, as herself. She stood across the desk from him in the quiet way of a woman who has decided something completely. She said, I don't know what the practical architecture of this looks like. He said, neither do I. She said, that's never stopped you building something. He said, no. She said, then build it. He stood. And here is what did not happen. There was no score, no cinematically lit moment, no line designed to be quoted. He simply stood, looked at her, and said, I'm an architect. I can redesign things. She laughed, the real laugh, the one with no calculation in it. Outside, the city conducted its enormous, indifferent business. The unremarkable street held its unremarkable traffic. The door stood open, as it always stood open, because he had told her once that a door that is always open says something to the person outside it before they have made any decision yet. She had remembered that. She had come back through it. There is one more thing. The model in the window. The Whitmore Library. He had been working on it the day she first stopped outside. A woman arrested by something she could not name, in a window she had no reason to notice. 4 months after she came back through the door, the Whitmore Library was completed. At its entrance, he had made one small adjustment to the original design. The door was angled 3 degrees further from the street than any standard specification required. It said, come in differently. He had never told her. She noticed on the day of the opening, standing beside him on the pavement, before anyone else arrived. She said, you changed the door. He said, I changed my mind about what it was facing. She looked at him. She took his hand. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. I want to talk to you about what this story is actually about. It is not about fame. Fame is the condition. It is not the subject. It is about the particular loneliness of a life lived entirely in public, the slow, invisible erosion of the small, private things, the cereal preferences and the Tuesday mornings, and the capacity to stand in a doorway and make a decision for no reason, until the person doing the living can no longer locate the line between who they are and who they are required to be. And it is about the other loneliness, the one that looks like contentment from the outside, the life arranged so carefully against vulnerability that it became its own kind of cage, comfortable, self-sufficient, correct in every measurement, and quietly, precisely, airless. She could not go to a supermarket. He could not let anyone close enough to matter. These are not equivalent wounds, but they are wounds that recognize each other. That is rarer than people understand. Daniel looked her up on the second morning and decided it changed nothing. He was not naive. He knew exactly what he was choosing, the exposure, the intrusion, the version of his quiet life that would have to be renegotiated to make room for hers. He chose it anyway, not loudly, not heroically. On an ordinary morning, before anyone arrived, by closing a browser window and returning to a drawing. Lena left and came back. At an airport at 3 a.m., 11 things on her calendar and an agent who was not speaking to her, she made the only decision that felt more true than difficult. We talk about courage as though it announces itself. Most of the time, it looks like a flight booking made in the dark. She had a preferred cereal, a blue box. She had known this about herself for a long time and had let the machinery of her life make the knowledge irrelevant. He handed her the blue box without looking at her. This is what love looks like when it is not performing love. It looks like a basket, an empty aisle, a man who knows when to look away. He changed the angle of a door. She noticed before anyone else. She stopped in front of an unremarkable window on an unremarkable street for no reason she could name. The reason was already there. It just hadn't introduced itself yet. The people who see us clearly, who look at us without the agenda of the transaction, who hear the thing beneath the thing we are saying, who make coffee with the same attention they bring to everything. They do not always arrive with music. Sometimes they arrive when you step out of a side door with 40 minutes unaccounted for. Sometimes all it takes is an unremarkable door and the willingness to walk through it. If this story resonates with you, kindly share it. Thank you for watching.